Tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to today's webinar, Kōrero and Reflections about Violence Within Whānau and Mahi Tūkino, a Litany of Sound Revisited. Before we begin our webinar today, I'd like to ask Poata Watene to open our webinar with a karakia. Tēnā koe, Poata.
Tēnā koe, kia ora hui hui tātou. He tapu terangi nei, he taonga terangi nei. He taonga terangi nei nā i o matua. Purutia tēnei taonga kia mahi ake ai ngā mānukakuko o te wā. He mea tapu, he mea tūturu. Tā tau ko te rangi runga, ka tau ko te papa i raro. Tūturu kia papa tuanuku, whakamaua kia tīnā, tīnā. Hui e, taiki e.
Ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Poata. We'd just like to invite all of our panellists to join us on screen. Kia ora koutou. Ko waia hau, ko tapo au unu ki te maunga, ko wairau te awa, ko kura haupō te waka, ko rangitāne o wairau te iwi, ko Ngāti Huataki te hapu, ko Omaka te marae, ko Charlotte Mōtō Kungoa. I o reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, my name is Charlotte Moore. I'm the kaiwhakahaere of the New Zealand Family Violence Clearinghouse, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar today. Before I introduce our speakers more fully, I'm just going to run through some housekeeping or netiquette for our webinar. First of all, as attendees, your microphone and cameras are off, so no one can see or hear you. We are delighted to have Rangi with us, who will be doing sign language interpretation. To see the interpreter, you can click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. You can use the chat box to share comments, and you can set those comments to go to all panellists and attendees, or just to host and panellists. Please note that we may have journalists in the audience with us today. You can also use the chat box if you have any technical issues, and we will try to help. You can use the Q&A box for questions for our speakers. They will answer your questions at the end, but you can ask questions at any time. We are also using the Zoom automatic closed caption service. You can turn this on by clicking the CC button on your screen. Please note that if we consider any comments or behaviour to be disrespectful or offensive, we reserve the right to remove people from the webinar at our discretion. We are recording today's webinar and will make the video available after the event. We ask that you don't record or stream our webinars in any way. By attending or watching this webinar, you agree you will not save, record, share or post the session or any portion of the session, including screenshots, audio recording, video recording, screen sharing or screen recording. Our NZFVC team, including Megan Setti and Caleb Lloyd, are in the background today, helping to manage the tech issues and moderating our Q&A. We understand too that the issues that we'll be discussing today can be challenging or triggering. You can mute the sound or leave our webinar at any time. This webinar is a wayfinder to continue the kōrero from Violence Within Whānau and Mahi Tūkino, a litany of sound revisited, with speakers who will reflect on research and practice. Violence Within Whānau and Mahi Tūkino, a litany of sound revisited, is an in-depth literature review that brings together contemporary mātauranga from Māori researchers in one book. It's designed as a reference resource for rōpū, kaimahi Māori, Māori communities in Whānau, and as a roadmap for systemic change towards toi ora. Today, our panel will share kōrero based on past evidence and learnings, present insights and issues, alongside future dreams and aspirations from the next generation. The kōrero blends research with real-life expertise and solutions from out in the field at the flaxroots, from Māori kaimahi perspectives working in family violence and sexual violence in the community. Our panellists. Professor Denise Wilson is an Associate Dean of Māori Advancement and Professor of Māori Health at Auckland University of Technology, AUT. She is also a member of Te Pūkotahitanga, the Māori Ministerial Advisory Group, previous member of the Family Violence Death Review Committee, Chair of the Family Violence Prevention Investment Advisory Board, Deputy Chair of the Family Violence Prevention Expert Advisory Group, and member of the Health, Quality and Safety Commission's Te Rōpū Māori, Māori Advisory Group. Kia ora, Denise. We also have with us today Te Whetu Mairangi Balzer-Horo. who is a member of the Expert Advisory Group for Children and Young People, working with the Puna Aonui to inform how mokopuna can be involved in the implementation of Te Arerekura. She is also a rangatahi ora lead at Te Rau Ora at the Centre of Māori Suicide Prevention. Kia ora and welcome, Whetu. We also have Ngarongo Eaton Brown, who's the kai whakahaere and chief cup of tea maker for Whaiora Sexual Violence Specialist Services. She's been working in the sexual violence sector for over 15 years and believes that sexual violence is a violation of whakapapa. Welcome, Ngarongo. And finally, we have Poata Watene, who's the co-chair of Te Pūkotahitanga and chief executive of Tūoho Mai Services, which was formerly HAPE, the Hamilton Abuse Intervention Project. Poata has extensive experience in therapy, te ao Māori healing, and in restorative pathways, which have improved the lives of whānau and provided him with valuable insights into what works for Māori. I'm going to begin our webinar now by handing across to Denise, who's going to start by giving us an overview of the Litany of Sound before inviting our other panellists to then share their reflections and insights. Tēnā koe, Denise.
Tēnā koe. I ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā hui I tau wha rau rangatira mā. Tēnā koutou katoa kua hui mai nei ki I nei hui ki te kōrero I ngā kaupapa o tēnei rā. Ka nui te mihi, ka nui te aroha kia koutou katoa. Ko wai au, hia uri a hau, ai nui Ngāti Parau ki Heratonga, whakatohia Ngāti Onioni mea Ngāti Tū Wharetoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you all. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the people who have worked hard to make today possible and a reality. Charlotte, Megan, Caleb, and Rangi, thank you very much. Ka nui te mihi kia koutou. I also want to acknowledge and thank our panellists who kindly agreed to participate in today's webinar. I also want to acknowledge Sarah Sparks, who has been in the background supporting us as well, getting ready for this webinar today. The violence is neither normal or acceptable in our whānau, yet it occurs. Historically, violence within our whānau and hapu context was not tolerated and was addressed swiftly and harshly. We know this through our creation stories, our pūraku tāwhito, ancient stories, and other forms of knowledge that are transmitted from generation to generation. We know that transgressions against women and children were not accepted. And historical colonial settlers also documented the absence of violence occurring within the whānau. Fast forward today, and Māori are disproportionately overrepresented in poor social, health and justice outcomes compared to others living in Aotearoa. I don't want to dwell too much on this point because I think we, hear about it repeatedly, but it is a reality that Māori women and children are more likely to experience severe consequences of violence and also death. So violence and mahi tūkino, or sexual violence, pose significant challenges for our whānau. They can occur separately or together. No matter what, they are violations of our whakapapa. What they do is diminish the mana and well-being of all concerned in the whānau. So while some of us would rather not think about it or talk about it, family violence and sexual violence affecting our whānau is undeniably associated with colonisation and ongoing colonialism that has marginalised and created conditions of abject struggle for our whānau today. Tikanga and cultural values and beliefs kept everyone safe. But with the loss of land, language, and cultural practices, and aided by urbanisation, a disconnection of our whānau with tikanga was lost for some. The historical and intergenerational trauma and violence that has snuck into whānau has become ways of life, and some of the defining features. This sets aside family violence affecting other groups of people. So violence affecting our whānau has historical and intergenerational considerations to be thinking about. The word litany refers to the long-standing repetitive documentation and articulation of grievances. It is the things we have heard over and over again and again. Pages 33 and 34 of a Litany of Sound Revisited maps out numerous reviews, inquiries, reports, and the groups formed over decades to try and get in front of this problem. I guess one of my real observations is that despite the statistics and the realities, it doesn't evoke the sufficient change that we need. And so I think, we need to start looking back to understand why we are here today and how then that can inform us moving forward. So whakapapa, provides a foundation for understanding and is layered. It provides us our creation stories, and within those creation stories, it tells us that violence in Mahi Tūkino were not tolerated, that mātauranga Māori holds our solutions and the ways for going forward, and that the relationality positions the importance of relationships within our whānau that often are not good quality when we sit out there in the community and listen to some of the experiences of our whānau trying to engage with services. So ironically, the violence within our whānau in Mahi Tūkino has been destructive on whakapapa. So it's that corrosive effects have eaten into it. Tikanga cultural values and beliefs provide us those culturally based and positive approaches for prevention and healing that are needed for intergenerational trauma and violence. And as one kaumātua said to me, they were the invisible fences that we had prior to colonisation that kept everybody safe. But with colonisation came seen fences, which then put everybody's business in behind closed doors and behind our fences in our whare. The other thing that I think the Litany of Sound establishes is that cultural identity, knowing who you are, is important for healing from violence, and so must be a critical thing. In terms of present insights and impacts, the Litany of Sound does outline, particularly to our tamariki, the lifelong impacts on health and well-being, physical, psychological, spiritual, and emotional. It is a complex and multifaceted phenomena that appears to defy resolution and certainly doesn't respond to simple responses. So additional dimensions of violence for Māori are the historical and intergenerational trauma and violence, the colonial context that we still live within today. And I want to just mention here about the systemic entrapment, the role that the system, the family violence system that should be there to protect and ensure the safety of our whānau has a role in keeping them in those situations. The other insight is that trust is an endemic issue, and it's rooted in systemic and structural racism. So many of our whānau don't have trust when they engage with systems. But what our research has shown is that people who are kind and caring and prepared to take the time to listen, and listen to listen, not listen to speak, can make a big difference. We know that for many whānau, they engage successfully with Māori providers, kaupapa Māori providers. We also know that kaupapa Māori and te ao Māori approaches are solution focused and encompass holistic spiritual and cultural aspects. So amazing providers are working with our whānau, but often with suboptimal resourcing. So in terms of future aspirations for the next generation, the whakatauki kia whakatoa muri te haere whakamua. I walk backward into the future with my eyes fixed on my past. Really, begs for us to be learning from our cultural traditions. So efforts must be underpinned by knowledge about why we are the way we are today and the historical and contemporary social conditions that enable the persistence of intergenerational trauma born out of violence in Mahi Tūkino. But those things should not paralyse us or keep us focused on the negative aspects, but help us understand why our whānau are where they are today and see the potential that exists within whānau. Eliminating violence within our whānau and Mahi Tūkino must be a collective endeavour that is led by Māori. My moe in doing this mahi is that our mokopuna could have embark on their life journey without the corrosive and damaging effects of living amidst violence and Mahi Tūkino, so they can live violence-free and have strong and healthy mana and wairua. But to do this, we need to adequately support whānau to be their best, especially where intergenerational impacts have defined what is normal and acceptable, and aid them in gathering additional tools for their kete in times of need, so they can be self-determining. And it's about healing and prevention. But to do this, we must have a specialist and skilled, competent and effective workforce. And we also need to have appropriate reviewing and monitoring mechanisms so we can track our progress. It is my hope that people will be able to use the information within a Litany of Sound Revisited to become better informed about the realities for those whānau affected by violence in Mahi Tūkino. Our whānau have hopes and dreams, but need compassion, caring and supportive people to assist them in creating non-violent context to realise these. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'll hand it over to the next speaker.
Kia ora, Denise. Ngā mihi nui ki a koe. You mentioned that notion of being able to dip in and out of the Litany of Sound, and it is a really significant resource to hold all of that mātauranga in one place. But really, it is a taster, that really encourages, I think, all of us to dig deeper and to follow those strands and to really build our own understanding. So, ngā mihi nui ki a koe. Would like to invite Whetu to share your reflections as a rangatahi who's coming into this space, our future, what our future generations' aspirations are. Handing over to you, Whetu.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for that. Kia ora everyone. It's really cool to see people in the chat message who they are and where they're coming from. It feels a little bit more personal, so keep that up. Ko Watene, ko te whetu Mairangi tōku ingoa. I come from tauranga moana, Hāngarau, no te whānau wihongi ki Kaikohe, te whānau Grace ki Tūpāroa me Ruatoria, te whānau Muirhead ki Scotland, te whānau Horo, te whānau Collins kei Taranaki ki Parihaka. But I like to tell people I'm a Te Arawa princess in a Ngāpuhi taniwha. A little bit controversial it could be. In the past, I've worked in healthy homes initiatives, youth remand homes, youth work, youth support roles. But currently I'm the lead of the rangatahi ora space at Te Raora, focusing on mental health, well-being with wānanga, rangatahi, covering topics like suicide prevention, resilience building, navigating the online system safely in regards to pornography. And my nanny, I'm a big nanny's girl, and she's worked within the space of prevention of violence my whole life. And so, yeah, she's one of my biggest inspirations. And my biggest passion is ensuring rangatahi have voices and they're heard and those voices are actioned. So building their capacity and capability to thrive, rangatahi are closer to what the future looks like. And so we have dreams that we want for our mokopuna. You guys have your mokopuna now, and we've got dreams and we need to start now. And so before I start my kōrero, I just wanted to share that this is my first webinar. And I usually thrive in spaces where we're talking and whakaaro and wānanga, but I preach to rangatahi all the time to get out your comfort zone, so I better start walking my talk, and here I am. And so I want to say that I don't speak on behalf of all rangatahi. I can only speak from my own experiences and my own life. And my Uncle Ron taught me something on perceptions, and it's something that I use almost every day, and it's about how we can all be looking and talking about the same thing, but we all come from different perceptions and experiences, so the way we talk about it will be a bit different, but it's still coming from our truth. A little exercises. So I'm showing you this book. So I see a barcode, whereas you probably see the sun, but we're all talking about the same book. And so although we come from different perceptions, it is coming from our place of truth. And so I just wanted to start my kōrero from there. And so from there, I want you to take your pōtai pakeke off, and I want you to put a pōtai rangatahi on. And I'm going to take you through a little journey through the eyes of a rangatahi and list some of the things that rangatahi are facing and experiencing, and some things that could have probably helped. So everything I share is from my experience. I am aware that I talk very fast and sometimes I go over time, so I've got to make sure that I don't do that today. So the first kaupapa is that everything matters. So pakeke often come to me and ask, what are the top facing issues rangatahi are facing? And the answer is everything. So rangatahi face the same challenges as adults, like addiction, abuse, homelessness, so on, but often with fewer means and less control over their situations. And often it all gets categorized under rangatahi issues. So shout out to all the people working on the ground, all the people that are working with rangatahi, because it's a really tough space to be in. The next kaupapa I want to talk about is online safety and pornography. And so rangatahi face unique challenges with online safety, including exposure to harmful content like pornography, revenge porn. And the first time I watched porn was at kura. And my classmates were watching it, laughing at a video that portrayed the complete opposite to what I think a healthy, loving, intimate relationship looks like. And I remember feeling this at 13, feeling fearful for my future, that's what it was meant to look like. And so the normalization of this type of content can really distort the perception of how we see healthy relationships and how we go about finding our ways on how to be an adult. And in all honesty, it did shape my reality of what relationships were meant to look like. And so another thing is that a lot of rangatahi know someone or know of someone in their kura who has sent an explicit photo of themselves, and it went around the whole school. The amount of momai and hurt these experiences must have caused these rangatahi, and their parents probably didn't even know, and the lack of tools and resources or awareness of these things to support rangatahi at the time weren't present. And it's just a really big kaupapa to bring into this topic because it still aligns, it all aligns. And on the flip side, we've heard the saying, hurt people, and where do rangatahi that are hurting go to admit what they've done and heal and change within a space or an environment where they aren't shamed or judged? There aren't any. And so, yeah, creating these safe spaces that we're allowed to make mistakes, and we're allowed to learn from these mistakes and become better and better people. And the next kaupapa is the lack of control or support that rangatahi often have is usually because they have less control over their environment, fewer resources to address issues of abuse or neglect, and they may feel like unheard, unsupported by the systems that are meant to protect them. Despite growing up in a very safe home, free of violence, I still experienced domestic abuse and sexual violence in high school, and this shows that a safe home doesn't protect us from the outside world. And I had friends that would tell me, don't tell my mom, or I won't be allowed to have friends over anymore out of fear that they wouldn't be believed or they would get into trouble. And it just really highlights the lack of tools and resources that rangatahi have to navigate these situations, because majority of the time, rangatahi go to other rangatahi, go to their cousins and friends, and there aren't really many tools within these areas that they go to, that they feel safe to go to navigate these situations. Another kaupapa is the need for culturally relevant interventions. So there is a huge need for culturally relevant and trauma-informed support services that incorporate Māori values and really value Māori values. Sorry, I'm noticing I'm talking fast again, so I'll slow it down. So empowering rangatahi through education, pūrākau, traditional healing methods like romi, karakia, taonga puoro is really essential for our healing. And this book captures that. And my biggest healings came from mātauranga that my nannies and koros gave me, so my kaumātua. In the thick of my momai, my karaua told me, go to tauranga moana, sit with tangaroa and cry till you have no more tears. I rolled my eyes and I was like, oh yeah, whatever, I would cry forever. But I didn't. And so I went, I finished crying and I dove into tangaroa and I let tangaroa carry away my momai. I'm saying this because a lot of the time we tell rangatahi, hey, your tupuna are always with you. Yeah. That's what I thought. But it wasn't until I fully experienced that my tupuna were with me that I got to really say, actually, yeah, my tupuna are really with me and they are there to look after us and they are there to manaki us and for us to lean on. And that was so powerful. Yeah. Lastly, one of the last kaupapa I want to talk about is suicide and whakamomori within rangatahi Māori. So tragically, rangatahi Māori have the highest rates of suicide in Aotearoa. And that can go back from historical trauma, economic factors, social media, bullying, these expectations to be perfect. And what I've heard from rangatahi is that they're over the we don't talk about that mindset, and they're over the taboo. They're already having these conversations with friends and cousins and family who may not have the tools to help. So normalizing these conversations are really crucial. When I was younger, I was taught that suicide is the action of ending one's life, whereas whakamomori is a state of being in deep momai, but continuing to journey through. And if you really think about it, we have all been in states of whakamomori where we feel really, really pōuri, but we're still pushing through. And there's a big difference between those two. One is an end and one is still a journey. And acknowledging that is a really big kaupapa in itself. And so before I end my kōrero, I have a couple of calls to actions for everyone, so a bit of homework. So having rōpū rangatahi is really beneficial, but having a seat at decision-making tables with pakeke is equally as important. Ensuring that that seat is safe, ensuring that that seat encourages sharing whakaaro, and with actions taken on those whakaaro. So actions definitely speak louder than words. That's my first point. My second one is I often tell rangatahi that if they are struggling or they have an awesome idea, to keep knocking on doors until someone opens it. Some people won't open the doors, and there are people who will. Like people in this kōrero today definitely are those people that will open doors. But your challenge today is that if a rangatahi knocks on your door, be that door opener. Help them action their dreams, help them find a way out, or help them find someone that can do that for them. And my last kōrero is that we can't change the world. There's huge pressure on rangatahi. Oh, look at all these issues. We can't change the world, but we can change our thoughts, our feelings, our actions. And if everyone present today made a commitment to this, the world would be a slightly better place, a kinder place, a safer place. And so, yeah, sometimes we think that the world is full of so many problems and it's just so big that we can't control it, but we can control ourselves. And I think that is a really important kaupapa to look into. If we all save out, like, look after ourselves in this rōpū, there's like 100 and something of us. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of healed people. But yeah, so I just really want to thank everyone for listening to this kōrero. I want to thank you all for letting me hold this space, letting me feel heard and seen. I look forward to hearing and seeing the amazing things this space will bring. And I really want you to know that our future's in safe hands. The rangatahi that are coming through are amazing. We just need to just uppy them a little bit more, make sure that we create environments where they're allowed to make mistakes and learn from them, and where they feel seen and heard, and where their voices are actioned. But yeah, those are my 2 cents of this conversation. Thank you all for listening to me, and I'll pass it back.
Oh, kia ora, Whetu. I think the comments will show that even though this might be your first webinar, you're blowing us all out of the water. And thank you for your challenge to us to always make sure that we are making space for our rangatahi, because we can't presume to know what rangatahi are feeling, wanting, needing. We need to listen, we need to provide those spaces and make sure that you are at the table. So just really want to mahito you for joining us today. And what everyone else won't know in the webinar is that we were all meeting up before we came online together, and we were all of us panelists, even some of us who've been on these kind of things a bit before, saying, oh, we're all feeling a little bit nervous. And it was Whetu who took us through an exercise to steady ourselves, to prepare for this. So you are a true leader, and really excited to see all of the wonderful work you're going to do in the future, with all of the support that needs to be wrapped around you too. So kia ora, ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Whetu. Can I hand over now to Ngarongo, who is joining us from Tairāpiti.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko maunga haumea te maunga, ko mangatū te awa, ko mangatū te marae. He uri no ngāri ki kaipūtahi, rawa ko whakatōhia, rawa ko ngai tūhoi o ku iwi, ko te whānau a ruahine kino, tōku hapu, kei te noho au ki tiranga nui a kiwa. Ko Roka Brown tōku pāpā, ko Phyllis Kui Orupe tōku māma, ko Ngarongo Brown tōku ingoa. I have 7 siblings, and I am the youngest of those siblings. I'm also a wife, a mama to 6 tamariki, and we have 2 heavenly mokopuna. I'm a survivor of sexual violence, and as a teenager, I remember going to tautoko a friend to access a service, a kaupapa Māori service, and we walked in, and heka, I ended up you know, accessing support myself. The Māori kura there at the time who supported us and started that journey off for us were extremely insightful in terms of the way that we were treated when we walked through those doors. So I'm really here to share as a survivor, as a service user, you know, being kind, showing care, manaakitanga and whakawhanaungatanga is absolutely everything. You know, and in terms of all those beautiful Māori kura who supported us back in those days and laid the foundations for us so that we can step into a space to heal as opposed to, you know, the other narrative. So I'm now, you know, a very young 47 years old, don't you dare. You know, and I think about the support that those Māori kura women gave so that we can pave the way. But you know, I want to reflect on one of the kōrero that a Māori kura here shared with me in terms of my journey forward, and actually for our whole whānau, our journey forward through this space. You know, she said to me, you know, she lit a fire in us and said, well, you know, go get your tohu, go do what you need to do, because there's much work to be done here. And we need lots of, you know, we need lots of ringaropa. So go do that tohu, come home and pick up some tea towels. You know, so for anyone who has ever emailed me and has seen at the bottom of my email, Ngarongo kaiwhakahaere / kapu tea maker, that, you know, I put that in deliberately to honour the words that Māori kura spoke over us, to continue to serve our hapori and our people and our whānau that walk through the doors, and to give them an experience in terms of, you know, acts of service. And I just also want to reflect on a kōrero that one of our rangatahi actually spoke at a kaimahi Māori wānanga, and she said, you know, if service is below you, leadership is beyond you. And I just, you know, how amazing is that we have rangatahi speaking those and, you know, actioning what that looks like for us in these spaces. So I feel extremely blessed and humbled to be here to, you know, wānanga and kōrero with the rest of yous. That's really all I have to say.
Oh, kia ora, Ngarongo. I think your reflection really reminded me of what Denise was talking about in terms of when people come through that door, and all of the things they're bringing with them is not just the mamae that they hold in terms of their abuse, but the structural issues and the trust issues, and what a difference it makes when that first interaction that you have is a safe one, where you can see yourself in that service and they can wrap around and hold you, and how we know how to do that, and kind of that pathway that is then opened up. So really want to mihi to you for joining us today. And yeah, I love that that saying, if service is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you. I think that's, yeah, it's so beautiful. Kia ora. We're going to finish our panelist kōrero with Poata Watene. Kia ora, Poata.
Te roa te poa i hoa iau, he rau taurihanga i kone e kui e. Tau horo mai te hina pauri, ko te ahua kaukia ki te atuai. Whana rawa kanunumi he wairua haere. Nā rota mai te papaki ki a maurawa mai. He koe a pono koe mo te iwi ki te whare. I mai ai honei koto tinana tonu. Ātināri nau mai. o ki wairua mai, kia mātou he mihi nei, tangi nei, tēnei rangi a tākua. He tapu terangi nei, he taonga terangi nei, o e hui mai, te katoa, he hoki ngā mahara ki ngā mahi rangatira mahi a mai nā, o ki wairua mai. Kia ora hui tātou. Huri tēnei noroto mai o Ngāti Mahanga, o tērā taha o. He huri noroto mai o ngai terangi, te whānau tau whau. Kia ora hui tātou. So just wanted to acknowledge my auntie Nori, alongside all our Māori kura of te whakaruruhau, who loved, nurtured and fostered and cared for my auntie for over 40 years in the mahi. And I wanted to acknowledge them. Ronnie, Roma, all the old school mātanga that have been around for decades, giving our wahine and tamariki a voice. E mihi ana ki o koutou e ngā rangatira. Nei rā no te o ngā mohopuna, a whetū. E kua tae mai, no reira, huri noa, kia ora hui tātou. I'm just going to put my timer on whānau because once I get into wānanga, about 10 minutes will turn into 10 hours. Kia ora mai au ki te kaupapa. And I'm sure post our kōrero with the wonderful kai kōrero we've had today, you've probably got a million questions that you might want to ask towards the end there. I note some of the participants, I know quite a few of them. When you've been in the game for kaupapa for a long time, you know a lot of the names that have come through across the ministries, but also within the community. So for you wonderful kaimahi who turn up to mahi every day, every week, every month, every year, and one of the toughest kaupapa in Aotearoa whānui, e mihi ana kia koutou. And so there's a few things I probably wanted to briefly touch on today. Mindful I've only got 10 minutes, so it'll be 10 minutes of magic and toi, hopefully. And, you know, if it's not, you feel free to message me behind the scenes and we can have that kōrero offline and have a kata. But kia ora tātou. Some probably, you know, when we look at, to provide some context, I guess, for the discussion of my wānanga kōrero today, is to think about, you know, violence, the transgression of whakapapa, the violation of mana and tapu. And when we have that kōrero and whakaro as part of our consciousness, everything and anything we do anchors us in wairua, anchors us in the importance of understanding spirituality and the pathway of healing. And so when we talk about that, we start looking at practice, for example, sector practice, whether you want to talk about practice frameworks, whether you want to talk about paitiakitanga, whether you want to talk about kaupapa Māori, te ao Māori methodology for healing. The majority of that is still fundamentally anchored in wairua and spiritual consciousness, spiritual awareness, environmental awareness when we use our karakia, relational intelligence, relational awareness when we engage with others, emotional intelligence, understanding that words aren't enough, that we must rally and mobilize resource to be able to shift up and shake up and change up whānau experiences. And, you know, when I think about and many of you that are here today, ideally, you probably got all the insights also. And one of the things I want to really share is that within Te Rere Kura, if we're really genuine about shaking up and shifting up, the workforce capability, workforce development must be one of those anchors. And as Whetu's identified and being really kind and gentle about reminding us that the rangatahi also need to be part of that reo, because that reo and its kupu and its intent is a healing reo, it's a healing language. Manaki, awhi, taku karikia, it's a healing vibration, what we call ihi rangaranga, positive vibration, Uncle Bob. And so, you know, when you normalize that type of thinking in the whakaro, as a leader, I wanted to acknowledge all the leaders. Ideally, your organizational culture needs to encompass that. Your organizational culture needs to reflect that. I'll be in years of senior management and years of leadership within the sector. We won't always get it right as leaders, but recognizing when we haven't got it right and taking it back to the people is where we will experience some wonderful shifts and change. But I never forget my place. I may be a CEO of this, I may be a co-chair for the ministerial body. When I go back to my marae and my whānau that are on probably joining and are listening will laugh, because they know when I go back to my marae, I'm in the kitchen. I'm doing the dishes, and like many of you do 4 days straight with a couple of hours sleep, and you cook, you clean the toilets, you go and dig the holes, you go and cook the kai, you do the shopping, and that is a way of grounding ourselves. You stay grounded in the mahi, you stay grounded and connected to the people, and you're never sitting in the ivory tower disconnected. The marae often brings us back to reality and reminds us that we have an obligation to serve the people. I think our Samoan, Samoa, o le ala I le pule o le tautua. Hey, that manaki is achieved, and greatness is achieved through serving the people. Tērā kōrero. I probably want to touch on also kaumātua, the critical role that kaumātua play, even within our organisation, the long-standing family violence specialist organisation for over 30 years. Kaumātua still play an important part for our tikanga. They have a reo that's unique for their generation. They have a language that's unique in terms of how it can miri the mauri of an environment and change and shift up the environment, energizing the environment. They have a connection and affinity to the whenua. They intrinsically understand wairu and spirituality without needing a title. Their presence can often assist in the mauri and establishing the mauri that's an environment where all feel comfortable no matter what your race or your background. So kaumātua still play an important role. In terms of our tāne as the primary transgressors of mana, whakapapa tapu, the tāne, we have an interesting journey inside into self, and when we talk about some of the wānanga and some of the programs, we have to be realistic about that, about the tāne journey. A 10-week intervention, medium intensity intervention, particularly for those in Arapautama Department of Corrections, 0.7 Rockaway and below for medium intensity. You're not necessarily going to see significant shift in 10 to 20 weeks of a program of wānanga about behavioural change, insight into self, cognitive self-change, cognitive behavioural therapy. But what it does is provide some level of understanding into themselves, into their behaviour and how they impact. More importantly, about taking ownership and accountability of their behaviour. Now, the problem is when they go back to the home environment, is that the reo and their language starts to change. The non-verbal language starts to shift, ideally, not all the time. And then if whānau haven't been part of that shift, there's a disconnect with their wahine, there's a disconnect with their tamariki. All of a sudden, ko wai koe, a wahine and their tamariki mokopuna asking, man, who's this fella? His reo, his language has changed. He's starting to sound like a psychologist. He's starting to sound like a therapy person. But the reality is there's some beautiful, subtle shifts from the tāne, but they're not necessarily recognised in that moment and in that space. And those are tough journeys that the tāne must take. Because it only takes a tāne to do a program for 20 weeks. He can walk out, go to the lights. The reality is a car drives past, it's the wrong colour, a sign goes out the window, and then it's on. 20 weeks is lost within 2 minutes because he starts throwing down. And that's been pono whānau. We know that from our experiences. Now, for our tamariki and wahine, so that's another kaupapa that we need to really think about whether we're investing. Early intervention, prevention, focusing on the specialist kaupapa and having the workforce that can deliver that level of therapy, treatment, kaitiakitanga, if you like, if it's kaupapa Māori, Te Ao Māori methodology. But changing your name to a Māori name doesn't mean that you're going to be culturally responsive to your community. And I've seen that numerous times. And it's I'll be pono about it. It's a tough conversation because I share that with a lot of my Pākehā colleagues in it who have the best intentions and they have the heart and they want to change up their service to be more culturally responsive. But the reality is, often we can cause more damage if we purport to be a kaupapa Māori, Te Ao Māori methodology. Whānau have that expectation and they come through and there's an instant disconnect because we can't deliver the cultural responsiveness, the tikanga, the reo, the wairua, the mauri or the whare, and the healing of it isn't tūturu, tika or pono. So we can have those conversations in these type of wānanga and feel comfortable about it because we're here to explore our whakaaro. Now, when people ask me, Poata, how can I change and shift up my service to be more culturally responsible? One, first thing I would do is establish a relationship with tangata whenua, mana whenua. Secondly, I'm not one that quickly buys into iwi hapu have all the answers. No, they don't, because a lot of the kaupapa Māori organisations fundamentally and primarily deliver those sexual violence services and family violence services in the rohe, not the iwi and not the hapu. Happy to be challenged about that kōrero, but I've seen it for decades. And I think that's, you know, you have to have those courageous, tough conversations and be upfront. Iwi connect us to the whenua, iwi connect us to the pūrākau, iwi hapu connect us to the awa that connects to the whakapapa. But often iwi do need to walk alongside our providers, both Tauiwi and Māori providers, to provide that level of cultural expertise, that cultural lens to ensure that the tikanga is pono and tika. And when we look at workforce capability, you know, we can start talking about cultural supervision, clinical supervision, professional supervision, practice standard frameworks, how we align to that, how is that recognised, and you know, we have a look at the pay equity rollouts and how that's enhanced our ability as organisations. Oh, that's my timer. Enhanced our ability, capability and capacity to acknowledge our workforce. If we can't acknowledge our workforce as leaders, there's an instant disconnect, and we have to rally as leadership to be able to provide the right level of training, the exposure to psychology. People say to me, oh, Poata, you know, you're a bit of a kūpapa, you sit across psychology, cognitive behavioural therapy, cognitive self-change, but then you also sit across te ao Māori, kaupapa Māori methodology. There's no reason, whānau, why those can't dovetail together. We've got a number of models and research. The research is clear that they can work side by side, and they work very, very well. Some organisations will specialise in kaupapa Māori, te ao Māori methodology that gives them the X factor. Some organisations, agencies, departments and tauiwi NGOs are adopting tikanga concepts and ways of working, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as there's a robust level of integrity and cultural monitoring, and mana whenua, tangata whenua, or cultural expertise has some level of input and oversight. So I'm mindful I've used my 10 minutes, whānau. Happy to answer any questions that you may have. And given those that have joined today, I'm sure that you have a lot of the answers yourself. Kia ora hui hui tātou.
Ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Poata. You used your 10 minutes plus very, very well. And I'm sure covered off a lot of things that people have been really curious about, looking at some of the questions that came in prior to our webinar today. So ngā mihi nui ki a koe. Beautiful waiata too. So thank you again to all of our panelists. We do have some time for Q&A, and we will have a look at some of the questions now. We may go a little bit over our time, you know, by 5 or 10 minutes so that we can answer a few more questions. So for those of you who can stay, please feel welcome to do so. But we always knew that there was going to be such rich kōrero from today's webinar that we can only ever scratch the surface. And I guess that's a little bit about the theme of a litany of sound, is that, you know, it touches on so many kind of important, so much important mātauranga, you know, that it's impossible to cover all of that in a 1 hour webinar. But one of the questions that has come through in our Q&A, Denise, you were talking about systemic entrapment, and how that the systems that are really supposed to be set up to support whānau are actually working against them, and whether you could provide some maybe more practical examples of what this looks like in real life.
I think, yeah, particularly from our research, and you know, we've just been recently out doing some more wānanga, and you just hear it over and over again. But I guess systemic entrapment has about 4 key aspects to it. One is the fear of our whānau to put their hands up for help, with the very real fear that their tamariki will be taken from them. And we've got lots of examples in our research of that happening. Fear that they're going to encounter people who are disrespectful, judgmental, and act in racist ways. Fear around ineffective people in the services. And, it's things like, I don't know how many times I've heard people say, you think that they were going to pay money out of their own pockets for what I'm asking. So they end up not getting what is needed, or they get denied services. Like one young woman with her 4 tamariki, 2 of them under 5, in the middle of winter, homeless, just what they walked out with, what they had on, waited weeks and weeks for an appointment with kāinga ora, only to be told it was her choice to leave. Not a helpful response at all. And there's other ways in which that unfolds, but also the fragmentation and disconnection of the services, where between services they're not necessarily sharing information or talking to one another, and so it becomes really complex to navigate and move through that. So in those ways, the system itself keeps women and children particularly entrapped in their relationships. And I think if you look at Tāne, even when they want to put their hands up and get help, that's not always straightforward. So we cannot discount the role of the system in keeping women and children in violent and unsafe situations. I hope that helps whoever asked that question.
Kia ora, Denise. Does anybody, any of our other panelists have anything they want to add to that? Kaore, kei te pai. One of the other questions has been around how do we actually support kaimahi Māori working alongside our whānau? Some of the wānanga that I know that I've attended, there's been reports about how sometimes isolated kaimahi Māori feel, how lonely it can be sometimes, particularly when they're working within tauiwi organisations. So just, I guess, wondering about how do we support our workforce so that they are supported to do that critical work with whānau. I'll open it up to any of our panellists.
Yeah, I guess if I can have a little bit of a kōrero on that. So that we hear that often and all the time, especially here in Te Ranganui-a-Kiwa. Our kaimahi who work in sexual violence sector, family violence sector are exhausted. Kaimahi Māori who work in these sectors, more so, because there's an element of and that some of the people that we're working with are somehow connected to us in terms of whānau, but we also, while we work in these spaces, we also live in these areas. So it's really hard to make the disconnect. And we've had a couple of kaimahi hui with different service providers about how we support kaimahi Māori, especially in these spaces. And there are a few different kaupapa that are happening here where we can support kaimahi Māori, and that looks like, opening our whare up so that they can come and have a kōrero and do peer supervision with us. But, again, the opportunity to fool them so that they work out of the overflow of their puna. And I also just want to remind everyone who works in this space, whether you are a counsellor or social worker or a mama, you live and you are a part of the communities where this is real and it's happening, as kaitiaki, we feel a sense of responsibility in terms of how we take care of our kaimahi, especially in this space, because we want all kaimahi, especially kaimahi Māori, to be working out of the overflow, so they're not going home drained. And if I can just share a quick kōrero from by Katie Murray, who many of you know, she says all the time, to take care of myself, I have mokopuna. I go to my mokopuna because they fill me. So we have, within Te Ao Māori, we have these different roles: mokopuna, tamariki, rangatahi, rangatira, pakeke, kaumātua, who all play a real vital role in terms of what we work out of and what we're giving out of. So, there are lots of different kaupapa also around the motu to support kaimahi Māori, specifically in the FV, SV sector.
Can I just add in there too, is the need for regular professional development, which often kaimahi don't get access to. And the other thing is around that clinical supervision or that professional supervision, where people can, go and talk and look at how, they can interact and improve their practice, because without it, it's a really hard job. And I've listened to kaimahi who work 24, in 24/7 services, and but they get paid, well, there's only funding for an FTE, for example, for that 24-hour period. So, some of the resourcing is insufficient. So being adequately resourced, I guess, for anybody who's in those positions, for listening to that, I think is really critical as well.
Yeah, kia ora tātou. I think there's a couple of things I probably wanted to raise. One, leadership can either be an enabler or it can be the take, really. And that's from, a couple of decades of being in the kaupapa. And when I talk about leadership, there's a responsibility to provide opportunities, growth opportunities, to resource those growth opportunities, to sponsor those growth opportunities. We've got an aged workforce. That's the reality of it. And many of kaimahi have been in the kaupapa for a long time. We've got all our rangatei, the new ones, kaitiaki and practitioners coming up. But there's likely to be a knowledge gap and deficit if we don't look at seriously considering leadership development and capability and bringing our young leaders and rangatei through. With that expertise and all that history of decades and decades of mana, tapu, mamai, whakapapa, the family violence movement 4 decades ago, that rich history tends to get lost as the generations, if we aren't deliberate in preserving that knowledge and sector mātauranga. What I will say about the kaimahi, for the leaders, hopefully you're sponsoring your budgets, you're looking at your budgets, and you're clear about what percentage of your total budget and expenditure for that year is committed to cultural supervision, professional supervision, clinical supervision. But sometimes the cultural supervision, sometimes kaimahi just want to be with kaumātua. Sometimes they want to be with whānau seniors and whānau elders. Hapu, it doesn't necessarily have to be a construct. We know that some of our workforce is regulated. We know that some of our workforce is non-regulated. But the non-regulated workforce, to a certain degree, aren't necessarily acknowledged to the same level or degree, but they have valuable lived experience in that should be recognised by leadership. When we go through our recruitment process, are we recognising the lived experience? Have they done the appropriate level of healing and recovery to be able to heal others? Taking that level of responsibility as leaders. So I don't think there's one real magic formula, but as leaders, the organizational culture and organizational mindset that we develop and create can be an enabler or can be the take and the barrier.
Kia ora Poata. Kia ora kite.
That's great, whakaaro. Yeah, amazing whakaaro, all of you. Working in this rangatei space, it's Definitely similar to what you have said, is it can feel quite alone and it can feel quite draining and exhausting, and kōrero with other rangatahi working in these rangatahi spaces. When they are in these like leadership positions, a lot of the time people throw everything at them because they're like, whoa, okay, this rangatahi wants to do it. But a lot of the time they become burnt out. And so I think that's an important thing to think about. But also what you said before, Ngarongo, is creating them a space, not rangatahi only, but people that work in this space, creating a space where they can kōrero what they're feeling and just letting this out in a really Māori way, just wānanga what they're feeling, how people could support each other. I did a wānanga recently with rangatahi, and they were talking about how a lot of youth support systems work in their silos, and it's quite exhausting for them to go through all these different silos. And from that kōrero, an idea came about, which was like creating like a centralized hub, or just creating a centralized wānanga where youth advocates could come together and just kōrero and be like, hey, I work on this as well. Like, let's work together, let's thrive off each other and try fill our kete, and making sure that rangatahi are looked after no matter what challenges they're going through. If there's rangatahi in this listening, this wānanga came about from originally, like, I thought, oh, that would be cool, I'll wait for it to come along. But sometimes it will never come along. And so sometimes you have to just be like, oh, you know what, I'm going to be that person. I'm just going to do it. And a lot of the time in this generation, we have like imposter syndrome or tall poppy, but it's about pushing that away. If you feel like, oh, this needs to happen, you can do it. Like, you don't have to overthink it too much. You just put one little step in front of the other, and the people that will, when you put it out to the universe, the people that will come and up for you are the people that are meant to do it. So I think the point of what I'm trying to say is, if you've got a dream or if you've got an idea on how to improve this, you've got the answers, and it's about you having the courage to start to action these answers, because you don't have to wait for someone else to action it. You've got the tools, or you know enough people to be able to start actioning it. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Kia ora, Whetu. I am just aware of time, and I think that that's probably all we have time in terms of today's webinar. And again, I guess I'm just hopeful that that we have sparked ideas, thinking from all of the amazing kōrero and whakaaro that has come out of today's webinar, and that, you know, that there's a catalyst for further kōrero and more change that we need to see. Want to mihi to all of our panelists once again, to Denise, to Ngarongo, to Whetu, and to Poata. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your wisdom with us all today. It's an absolute taonga. Want to remind our audience, thank you for all of your beautiful questions, comments in the chat. We will be uploading a recording of today's webinar on our website shortly, and we'll let you all know when that is available, and also link to the Litany of Sound Revisited report, the puka puka, so that you can all access that as well. At the end of the webinar, you will get a link to our 5-minute survey. We'd be really, really grateful if you could fill that out for us. And I think without further ado, I will ask Poata to close us today with a karakia.
Tēnā koe e te rangatira. A talowhala vele suafo le atua ki o rāna ko te kātua i te arua mātau te atua. Kia ora hui hui tātou i runga nora, i tā tātou i whakaaro ai, i tā tātou i wawatai. E te atua e tareki, tahuri mai ngō taringa kia mātau e tūtahanga ana ki ngā haupu keri keri o te wā. Kia mahi ake ai ngā mānuka nuka o te ngākau marae. Koe i hoki rā ko te manawa maurua, koe i hoki rā te mana tūtiru, he taonga tiku iho, noroto mai o te tuauriuri, noroto mai o te whaioio. Tūtiru kia papatua nuku whakamaua kia tīnā, tīnā. Haumi e hui e tai.
Tai ki e.
Kia ora hui hui tai.
Ka kite.